one of the things that I think Qualia Mind does really well that's underappreciated is you show up a little bit better version of yourself at the end of the day, which is easy to miss. But what we'll then hear from sometimes spouses is, oh, my spouse is so much more pleasant when they're on Qualia Mind. And it's as simple as like the brain performs better when it has more resources. And when it doesn't, the harder jobs it does, like managing our emotions, having empathy, executive functions, are what suffer.
Gregory, I'm thrilled to have you today to talk about some of my favorite topics, in fact, right, in the world of human performance and also longevity. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on today, Angela.
I think let's just start with a little bit of background on you and how you got into this field. I know that you've been launching some, transformational products in this area, but how did you come into this area initially?
So I'm a naturopathic doctor, but the arrival there was I started out as an officer in the U.S. Navy back in 1984. Was the weird officer on both ships I was on that cared about what I ate and tried to exercise and live as healthy as possible in that environment. And when I got out of the Navy in 1989, I decided that I wanted to learn much more about things like nutrition and herbal medicine, things that I had built an interest in but didn't get to really explore when I was in the Navy, and ended up at the University of Hawaii studying medical anthropology as a master's degree. Really anything to do with Thailand and Southeast Asia was my focus, but my emphasis was in nutritional and medical anthropology. So kind of how like plants interfaced in traditional medical systems. And during that time, I wanted to start meditating and stumbled on a group of naturopathic doctors in Hawaii and thought, this is so cool. They're actually doing all the things that I've been trying to stitch together on my own. So finished that master's degree, went to naturopathic school, graduated in 96, and have been in the health and wellness world ever since, like much more directly than before that. And then like the brain, longevity, the things that I'm most interested in now, in part just because they're, like in a simple sense, if our brain works better, it's so much easier to do all the other things we need to do to stay healthy. And longevity, just because my focus has always been on the flip side of disease. What does health look like? And there's really no better scientific window into that than aging and what keeps us healthy as we get older.
For sure. It's very fascinating journey. And I think meditation, right? I mean, I love what you were saying there. You got kind of into it. Meditation is just so good, right? For many of the things we're going to be talking about today, for the health of our mind, but also for longevity too. What type of meditation do you practice?
So I do something that I'd refer to more as body scanning than classical meditation, where I'll just close my eyes, lay down, and then usually start in one part of my body. I always start focusing in my lip area, the sensations there, and then just kind of pay attention to where sensations start to increase somewhere in my body. And my assumption is a little bit like, oh, well, this might be like a little baby, crying for attention. So then I just pay attention to that area until that energy seems to release or move. And then, I'll just repeat that for 10 or 15 minutes, usually the beginning and end of days. So.
Which is actually wonderfully relaxing. I think that when we look at now, right, and it's just getting busier, I remember thinking 2020, just how time started to just slow down for a little bit when people were locked down in that period. And certainly a lot of mums like me were saying, gosh, I don't know how we were running around so much before. I don't want to go back to that old lifestyle, and then sure enough, here we are. And actually life feels even faster than it did pre-COVID, with the advent of AI, and we're just being given so much information. Obviously, things like meditation and different practices can help with that. But I know that you have researched extensively into compounds that can really help the brain and help us to perform better. I've tried Qualia Mind myself many times. I've used it, and it's definitely helped me to feel more switched on. When you're looking at nootropics, what are the key ingredients that we need to think about to increase performance without having that overstimulation? Because what I notice when I take Qualia is that I get that lovely concentration and sustained. It will kind of lengthen out my work periods, but without, say, the over jitteriness that you'd get from having too much caffeine. And I can see, it's got things like L-theanine in it, for example, that help to smooth that out. But if someone's looking at a nootropic blend because they want to enhance performance, what are some of those key ingredients?
Well, I think before ingredients, I always think it's important to think of principles. Like, if we understand the principles, we usually will be in the right area code of what we're doing. And one of the principles for most things in health would be almost, Goldilocks rule is sometimes what it's referred to. Sometimes the Yerkes-Dodson law is, a more scientific way. But the general idea is there's almost always a just right range of something. And caffeine, since you mentioned that, would be one of those things that, if we're going to sit down on our computer, like me, read studies, the amount of caffeine to get in the really good zone isn't particularly high to get there and stay there. So in nootropic studies, it would say on average be somewhere 50 to 200 milligrams. If, for a power lifter going into the gym that wanted to really excel at that, it's usually more than that. And that more, if I was sitting at my desk, would actually hinder focus in a sense. So this is like an oversimplification of focus, but often what happens to get in that really good zone, there's one subset of people that need a little bit more stimulation. They need, motivation, something to kind of bring them up. There's another subset that there's almost too much going on already in their brain. Like there's a little bit of chaos or frenzy in there. And so they need their brain to be a little more calm to get to that ideal place of focus. And I know at Qualia, when we think of building a great nootropic like Qualia Mind, we think of both that Goldilocks rule and let's bring things, no matter which side you are to that better spot. And so you mentioned L-theanine. It really pairs well with caffeine to create that sense of calm focus. L-taurine is another amino acid that does the same thing. So you'll see that as well. So those are things that kind of counteract that tendency for too much caffeine to cause the irritability, or sometimes we'll work faster but make more mistakes, which isn't ideal. So caffeine and that. And then you have what I think of as your adaptogens, like rhodiola. And adaptogens by their nature are intended to bring us to that homeostatic or middle ground spot where performance is best. So I think for me, a very important thing is nootropic ingredients. Just think like more is not always better, and that often stacking things together will bring out the best in our performance.
And is that because when you're stacking these ingredients together, they have complementary or synergistic benefits? I know there, for example, like when you were speaking about the taurine and the L-theanine, that's kind of counteracting some of the stimulatory activities. Are some of the other things working together to enhance that focus and concentration?
Yeah, and that would be part of it. And then part also is they add new features in. So like lutein and zeaxanthin are often thought of as vision ingredients because they're super important for the back of our eye and the visual part of the brain. But I want to say there's about 9 or 10 human double-blind studies on lutein and zeaxanthin for cognition, and really useful ingredients for promoting BDNF, which is a neuroplasticity compound, and for things more long-term memory, like visual memory, verbal memory, but long-term meaning months to half a year. So some of the memory ingredients aren't about focus or motivation. They're about more long-term brain performance and the memory and the learning and the neuroplasticity that really all of us want, right? We want our brain to perform better across the board. There's another area of cognition that's often called social cognition. Those are our empathy and our ability to regulate our emotions and have a sense of the emotions someone else may be going in. And saffron would be an archetypal herbal ingredient that seems to work primarily on the social cognition. So I know when I would build a product like Qualia Mind, it's all right, let's do the complementary things like the caffeine, the L-theanine, the taurine, but then let's have other things that play important roles to give our brain a much more holistic, higher level of performance.
That's interesting. So the saffron is helping with that sort of social side, right? Because I've seen it used in combination with ashwagandha previously to help with things like sleep and relaxation.
Yeah, it's usually thought of as more of a mood herb, as ashwagandha, an adaptogen, like a calming herb. But again, similar to lutein, saffron has quite a few really good um, nootropic studies, including some for focus. So it would be, I tend to think of things like there's some things that are rated properly, there's some things that are underrated, and there's some things that are overrated. And saffron would be one of those underrated. I don't think people realize the many things it's valuable for. And you named a couple.
Mm-hmm. And when we look at the citicoline that's in there, that's for helping with attention and focus primarily.
Yeah, so the citicoline is a choline precursor. Alpha GPC would be another. And they supply choline in forms that are thought of as bioavailable for the brain. And the brain uses choline for many things, to make cell membranes, which is super important, but also to make acetylcholine, which is the neurotransmitter for, I guess, a story I heard about acetylcholine that makes sense to me is that without acetylcholine, 10,000 hours would be wasted. And that's that idea of 10,000 hours to gain mastery. And it's because acetylcholine is really important for neuroplasticity and to get the brain to fundamentally change the things it views as relevant so that it will dedicate more learning and memory resources to them. So acetylcholine precursors like acetylcholine become important in a nootropic stack, in part because the average diet, at least in the US, falls short of how much of those choline compounds they're getting in their diet. And I think it's the same in most of the developed world. So it's, again, not as more is better, but we absolutely need to get enough of choline in our diet to have the neuroplasticity, the learning, the memory, the focus that we want.
And with things like the ginkgo, is that enhancing blood flow, for example?
Ginkgo is about blood flow as its main or a main mechanism of action, and typically, like a lutein, thought of as a slower acting. So, ginkgo, there are a few studies where they've given it in a single dose and then measured cognition. But I think of ginkgo as really excelling in the long-term game of enhancing memory by helping the brain be better nourished, better protected.
Interesting. I think I heard Dr. Daniel Amen talk about how he loves the look of brains that have ginkgo, like they're like, I don't know, clean brains. But I think so some of the things you're talking about there are actually the long-term benefits. And I think that's a question that comes up for many people when they're taking a nootropic is this, it kind of comes in three portions, I guess, to this question of, or three sections is this something that I should take daily? Should I cycle it in any way? And will I see any attenuation if I'm not cycling it? I wonder if you can answer those. Those are three key questions that I think I get from people.
Yeah, so I know at Qualia, and again, this would be more in that principle category. I mentioned Yerkes Dodson law earlier, and that's basically an adaptational law. And the idea would be if we start anything new, so let's say, some listeners decide, I'm going to start lifting weights for the first time after this call, which is a great thing to do for people that may not be, that almost anything we do, our performance will improve for a while. And then if we continue to do the same thing day after day, week after week, month after month, we'll eventually plateau. And then over time, if we keep doing that same thing, then performance will often worsen. So that's an upside down U, is the Yerkes Dodson law. And the thing going on the upside is performance, and along the bottom is usually thought of as time. And what makes that curve crunch down faster, meaning we go through the entire performance continuum, and would be the intensity we do something. So as an example, if you and I decided we're going to run a marathon every week for the next 6 months, we'd track through that ridiculously quickly and use up a whole bunch. But if you and I decided, oh, like we're going to do a gentle yoga class every, 3 days, 4 days for the next 6 months, our performance would likely still be improving. So the intensity of something determines how quickly we tend to track through that adaptational response. And in supplements, intensity is the amount we take, right? So if we take higher and higher doses thinking that more is better, we'll often improve performance a lot quickly and then plateau and then cease to benefit and often worsen. But if we do a lower amount or we have periodic breaks, like most people would do from weight training, then we interrupt that tendency to adapt and spread out the benefits over a much longer period of time. So with something like Qualia Mind, I know I take it Monday through Friday, my work days, and then take the weekends off. And then usually about once every 3 months, I'll take a week or two off, just like I would from weight training to deload periodically, right? To give my body more chance to recover. So I think, at Qualia and the way that I think in terms of a principle is when there's something we don't absolutely need to do every day, it's important to build in recovery from it, because recovery is often where magical things also happen.
Yeah, very much so. Okay, so to get the long-term benefits then, it's not something that you need to take every single day. You can take it, as you say, for 5 days, cycle off for the weekend, give your brain a bit of a break, and then every 3 months or so, you have a week or two off and then you come back to it. And that helps as well. It sounds like to also not only just have the benefits, but feel the benefits as well.
Yeah, so that's I know the way that we practice it here at Qualia. And with certain things like the lutein and zeaxanthin I mentioned, or choline, those are really nutrients, right? That are as long as we're not taking very, very high amounts of them, if we're just using them to fill the gaps in the diet, those would be fine to take every day for long periods of time. But things like the adaptogens, I think those I personally think of as more like exercise. Like, let's use them and recover, use them and recover. And so we just tend to use adaptogens in quite a few of our products at Qualia.
And these would be the things like the rhodiola, for example, and then also the adaptogenic mushrooms like the lion's mane.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So someone using this product, if they wanted to have focus, it was an interesting distinction you drew there around if you were doing powerlifting or weight training or some high intensity work, you'd likely need more caffeine for that stimulatory effect than if you were trying to focus on something or you're trying to access creativity and flow. If we take someone who is utilizing this because they want to get more done, maybe they're trying to prime their mornings, what would be the time before beginning that work? Like, how far in advance should you take the nootropic?
So just to clarify, with people doing weight training, Qualia Mind still rocks for that.
Okay.
And there's a little more leeway in the amount of caffeine they'll often tolerate before they would get to that not great caffeine place. But yeah, we've had initially, part of the reason Qualia Mind became successful is because it was embraced by athletes as a pre-workout. And I would say that in general, Qualia Mind seems to be felt fairly quickly, slightly quicker if you do it without food than if you do it with food. But in general, I think of 30 to 40 minutes before you'd really want to experience it is when you take it.
Okay, interesting. So with the 30 to 40 minutes, and then if you wanted to use it for that athletic performance and you were someone who had a high tolerance for caffeine, could you then combine it with a little bit of extra caffeine?
Yeah, we've seen that. There was actually one place we were at that someone was trying to, the booth next to us was run by the US Army, and they had, I think it was a barbell that in total was maybe 250 pounds. So maybe, 110 kilos, somewhere in that range. And they had a competition this weekend to see who could do the most repetitions of deadlifts. And a person came by, took up the 6 capsules of Qualia Mind, walked around for a bit, and then came back and set the record at that point. It was like 42 or 43. And over the course of the day, someone eventually beat him. So he saw that like mid-afternoon, took another packet of Qualia Mind, walked around for a bit, and then did like 51 or 52 repetitions. So he won the day, but so he did a double dose of Qualia Mind, which, it wouldn't be something we typically would do, but he was a big guy, and that, whether it was partly placebo, it was what he was relying on to get into that mental zone to really perform at his best in that one event.
Yeah. So he was effectively taking 12, like 2 full doses.
He took 2 full doses over the course of,
Yeah. Interesting. It's something I'm going to be using for a presentation that I'm going to be delivering late afternoon on Wednesday. So I'm going to I was thinking of actually splitting the dose and having some in the morning and then some in the afternoon just to prime myself for it, because that's when I tend to drop off in the day.
I know one of the things I notice personally when I take Qualia Mind, which is always early in my day, is I have much more stable energy through that afternoon time period, where otherwise I would normally, hit kind of a little bit of a slump.
When you take it in the morning, you still have stable energy in the afternoon. Interesting.
And I think I would think of myself as not like on the more sensitive side of caffeine, and taking it in the morning works great for me for the entire day. So one of the ways I think about a good nootropic is that you should feel it, that 30 to 45 minutes for things like focus and motivation and energy. And at the end of the day is when I think social cognition is crazy important, because that's when we come home from work and interact with our loved ones and our family. And if our brain has kind of used up all of its resources, its cognitive reserves, then we often will walk in the door, a little stressed, maybe irritable, grouchy. And one of the things that I think Qualia Mind does really well that's underappreciated is you show up a little bit better version of yourself at the end of the day, which is easy to miss. But what we'll then hear from sometimes spouses is, oh, my spouse is so much more pleasant when they're on Qualia Mind. So, and it's as simple as that, like the brain performs better when it has more resources, and when it doesn't, the harder jobs it does, like managing our emotions, having empathy, executive functions, are what suffer.